I have a pretty loud voice. Just to begin, CEO Rosario Reyes, LLI faculty and staff members, LLI graduating class of 2023, parents, family members, friends, and all well-wishers in attendance, thank you for being here today. And it is an honor, a privilege, and truly a pleasure for me to be here and able to address you on this special occasion. You see, I too am a graduate of a leadership program. Today, what I'd like to do is I want to share 3 things that I have found to be important along my journey. My hope is that these 3 things that I share with you will have some meaning for you today or sometime along your path in the future. So, I have these 3 pillars that will shape my message for you today. And the first pillar is story. You see, everyone has a story. And your story shapes you. And sometimes you have the opportunity to reshape your story. I'll talk a little bit about that. But story is so very powerful. And again, we all have them. The second pillar is unexpected mentors and supporters. You know, on our path to success, and success is something that we all have to define for ourselves. But on our path to success, there's always mentors and supporters that help us to get there. Now, there'll be some people who will tell you, I'm a self-made person, I've done this by myself. And I'm here to tell you that everyone who considers themselves to be successful, everyone that we consider to be successful has had some help along the way. They've had some mentors and supporters that have helped them to get to where they are. The third pillar is leadership matters. Leadership is so important. Programs like LLI are so important, and you will recognize the importance of this experience that you've had, the time that you've taken, the effort that you've put into taking the time to participate in LLI. It will pay dividends. That I can promise you. So those are my 3 pillars. So to begin, I want to tell my story, and to be honest, I want to start by telling my parents' story, because for 2 reasons. One, because they were so instrumental and important in my life, and actually their stories are more interesting than mine. So I'll start by talking about my father. My father was born in rural Louisiana in the 1920s. And so he was born into segregation. His parents were farmers. My grandmother and grandfather actually were tenant farmers, or some people call them sharecroppers. So they moved around quite a bit, and eventually they landed in Landry Parish, a place called Plaisance. The big city there was probably 300 people, and they lived in Plaisance, and that was where my grandfather began to try to make a place for his family. You know, my father had 5 brothers, 1 sister, and so this was a lot. You know, they, for all intents and purposes, they grew up very poor, and but they instilled this kind of notion of family in all their children. That was something that was very important. But the thing about my dad's existence in Louisiana was that he could only go to the 8th grade, because in order for him to go to high school, because of segregation, there were only certain high schools that black people could attend. And so in order for him to actually attend high school, he would have to travel just to go to school. So he spent a lot of his formative years just working on the farm. Eventually, when he reached the age of 18, he was drafted into World War II. And one of the interesting things about my father is that he was one of the first Marines, one of the first black Marines in the United States. They have this cohort of black Marines they're called the Montford Point Marines. This is a total different story. But he was one of the Montford Point Marines. They actually were recognized by Congress because they were the first black Marines, and because of the type of discrimination that they experienced, but they still served. They served very well, valiantly. And so anyway, he was able to graduate from high school when he was a young man. I think he was 21 or 22, and he was finally able to graduate from college. Now, on the other hand, my mother, her father was a physician. And if you can imagine a black physician in the 20s, 30s, and 40s was when he was really the prime of his career. He was kind of an anomaly. And because of that, he was able to, he and my grandmother really believed in education. In fact, they met as undergraduates at in college. And but they believed in education, and so they had 3 children, my mother and her sister and her brother, and they were, essentially my mother told me that if they wanted to go to school, their parents would pay for it. I mean, and they believed in education. And so that's an important part of the story as well. But my mother and father came from 2 different cultures, because my dad, growing up in Louisiana, grew up in a Creole culture, which was essentially African and French. This kind of combination of African and French, and some Spanish in there as well. And in that Creole culture, my dad told me this. He said the culture he grew up in, essentially, parents would accumulate dollars for their kids as they grew up, and they'd stash it in a shoebox or in a cupboard or what have you. And then once they came of age, they would take these dollars, give them to their child, and say, here you go, good luck, I wish you the best. And that was just the way things were done. What my father learned from my grandfather, my mother's father, was that if you, instead of taking that money, giving that money to your child, telling them, good luck, and hoping that they do well, if you instead take those dollars and invest in education, then you can ensure that they'll be able to find their way to success. And so my mother and father, when they married, they adopted that philosophy that my grandmother and grandfather on my mother's side had, and they imparted that philosophy on my brothers and I. I have 2 brothers. My older brother has worked in pharmaceuticals. My middle brother is an engineer, and I fortunately found my way to higher education. And so by our family standards, we have been successful. We have families, and generally live good lives. So we stand on the shoulders of my grandparents and my parents, and really have had an obligation to give back as well, because we've been so fortunate. Now, to talk about me, which is not as exciting, but so growing up in Seattle, as you probably would imagine, there was an expectation of me that I would go to college. Both of my parents, my dad, after he graduated from high school as a young man, he actually graduated from college as well. In fact, I remember him graduating. I was probably 6 or 7, and I'll never forget his cap and gown, because he's about 6'4", big guy. And I'll never forget him being in his cap and gown and actually graduating from college as an adult. And so that expectation was that we would all go to college. And so do you think I was excited about going to college? Not really. I kind of had to, and I really wasn't excited about it. It's primarily because, and I don't know if some of you experienced this, high school just wasn't really my thing. But I did it, and one of the things that was fortunate for me, because in the neighborhood I grew up in, not everyone went to college, and if they did, they went to college to play sports, and that was it. You know, you went to college, you played basketball, you played football. Actually, in my neighborhood, it was primarily football. I was fortunate enough that I was able to get a scholarship to University of Idaho to play football. So that was more exciting. That excited me about going to college. I know it doesn't sound like it does, but it got me there. After completing 4 years of college and playing football, one of the things that I did was I transferred. This is part of my story. I transferred from University of Idaho to Western Washington University, where I became a real student and a full-time student, and just had an excellent experience, much different from playing football. Graduated in broadcast communication and went on to work in radio sales, community news. I worked for a community newspaper, the Seattle Medium newspaper, and then there's a radio station, KRIZ. I worked for them. And also worked at getting my foot into the door at KOMO. So because my plan was to go into television. But I had another opportunity. I actually interviewed for a position as an admissions counselor and recruiter for the Office of Minority Affairs at University of Washington. And so I actually got that job. And that just changed my total path. And basically the reason why I'm here in front of you today is because of that change that happened in my life. But it happened because of my second pillar, which is unexpected mentors and supporters. Because as we cross rivers in our lives, it is our unexpected mentors and supporters who help us to identify those stones we can step on to navigate our path forward. So these unexpected mentors and supporters are so very important. They're very important to me in making my transition from University of Idaho to Western Washington University. And I'll tell you why. Because my story sounded good, the one I told you, but it was a tumultuous time for me. Because, to be honest, when I was at University of Idaho, and I say this sometimes to people, I met with more politics between the ages of 19 and 21 than most people will meet in their lifetime. We actually went through a coaching change, and it was pretty traumatic. There was a lot of change and things that were going on. And, you know, for most of us who were playing football, you know, our goal was to go and play professional football. And writing on the wall for me was that I was not going to play professional football. I just didn't have the playing time to be able to do that. So I had to figure out a new plan. And part of my plan was to leave University of Idaho and start over as just a student. But that was a monumental shift for me. One of the things I say about leaving sports for athletes, and some of you may have experienced this, I played football from the age of 8 up until the age of about 21. And so I would say it's the equivalent of someone who's in the military becoming a civilian. It's a monumental shift. I mean, everything you know, your identity is wrapped up in sports. Still, sports is part of my identity. And so this is a monumental shift. I was fortunate in that there was a Native American woman who worked at the University of Idaho, and I think she was everything that had to do with people of color. Her name was Tijuana Coconut. And I love saying her name because it's so melodic, Tijuana Coconut. And it says a lot about her as a person. She was just an upbeat, positive person, and she was really kind of this life-saving person for me because I was going through this tumultuous time, and she helped me to make the transition to Western Washington University. You know, the application process and transcripts and just ensuring that transition. You know, the other thing that she did was she connected me with a gentleman named Luis Ramirez at Western Washington University, who was running what is the equivalent of today their multicultural center. And so made contact with Luis Ramirez. Essentially, I was leaving, being on a scholarship. Now I was going to financial aid. The first thing I did was meet with Luis when I got to campus, and had a great meeting with him. And one of the things he said, "Hey, do you want to work for me?" I said, "Yeah, sure," because I had work study now because I was on financial aid. So I began working with Luis Ramirez in the Multicultural Center, and what I didn't realize is that Western Washington had this paraprofessional program. So essentially they were cultivating people to become university administrators. I didn't know this at the time. But anyway, so I was working with Luis, and he had me check on students, help them to get tutoring, help them to figure out their course schedules. If they were having challenges with professors, I helped them think about how they approach their professors. One of the other things I'll never forget, it was Black History Month. He made me do a whole week of programs for Black History Month. And the one really memorable thing that he had me do was to restart the Black Student Union. At the time, Western Washington University's Black Student Union had kind of taken a hiatus. And this happens at universities that have smaller populations of students of color. I think at the time, probably bigger now, but I think at the time, Western had about 60 Black students. And so he wanted me to restart the Black Student Union. And so by that time I had some friends who were Black, and so I made contact with them and told them that I was bringing this meeting together. I also, because I was working for him, I had access to students' information. So I contacted these 60 African American students and said, "Hey, we're meeting on this date." I had two goals in mind. I was going to make sure that they got on a regular meeting schedule, and then I wanted to find out ideas for keeping people engaged in the Black Student Union so we could keep this thing moving. And it was interesting, at that meeting, there was an idea that came out of that meeting, and it was to have an MLK scholarship banquet, a Martin Luther King Jr. scholarship banquet. And Luis Ramirez was in the audience. He was like a fly on the wall just listening to what was happening. And so the next week I came back to campus to meet with Luis, and when I met with him, he said, "Hey, Paul, that Martin Luther King Scholarship Banquet is already in motion. I've met with our foundation. We're going to have the dinner." And I said, "Oh, okay." And it happened. And it was a big event. I was the first student speaker for this event. The keynote speaker for that event was a gentleman by the name of Jesse Wineberry, who was a young state representative. He's still my friend to this day, friend and mentor. Another person I met at this meeting was a gentleman by the name of Enrique Morales, who was the director of the Office of Minority Affairs for the University of Washington, director of admissions and recruitment, for the Office of Minority Affairs at the University of Washington. And as I mentioned before, I had started my career in media, television, radio, and those sorts of things. But what happened is another mentor and supporter, because of that event and what he knew about me from Luis Ramirez, I got a call from Enrique Morales saying, "Hey, we have a recruiter position available. Would you be interested in applying for it?" It was a 6-month position, so it was like an interim position. And having been an athlete, one of the things that you do as an athlete is that you always recruit the new class of athletes. And so I said, what could be a better job? What could be a better job for a person like me than traveling the state of Washington, recruiting students of color to college? Nothing better. And so I said, yeah, I'll interview. Interviewed, got the job, worked there for 6 months, then interviewed for the full-time job, was able to get that, and so ended up working at the University of Washington for about 2-3 years. And, from there, was mentored on my path in higher education, ended up going into a master's degree program. Because of the mentorship that I received there, Enrique Morales is someone that I still hold dear, and a great friend, and just a mentor to me. And again, once I got back on the college campus, the world just opened up to me. And, I just tell this story because I think it's important to let folks know that our path isn't, sometimes it seems like our paths are so linear, very focused and straightforward. It doesn't always happen like that. And I think it's those mentors and those supporters are the ones along your path that are gonna help you to find that path forward. And I think that's so very important. And then the final pillar that I want to mention is that leadership matters. I felt like I was able to meet with success when I was working with Luis Ramirez at Western Washington University because I had gone through a program like LLI when I was an undergrad at University of Idaho. Now, a lot of my colleagues and peers who played football, all they were focused on was going pro. That was what they wanted to do. They wanted to be professionals. And at University of Idaho, maybe 3 or 4 every year actually get a shot, get drafted in the 7th, 8th round or something like that. A lot of free agency stuff that goes on, but in general, not many of them make it. So I was able to do a little bit more, spend a little bit of time in self-development in terms of leadership, and it paid off because when I got to Western Washington University, I was able to, Luis Ramirez helped me to develop my leadership. He helped me to put those things I had learned in place. And so I just want to say that the work that you've done with LLI is going to be valuable to you in the future. So moving towards closing, I I want to say that, you know, success, again, is defined by you. What's important, you have to define success for yourself. But I also want to say that success begins with a desire for success. Your success begins with your desire for success. And I think that you graduates of 2023 LLI have shown your desire for success by taking the time to invest in yourself with LLI. So, you all have the potential for greatness, and yes, there are challenges that you will face, and yes, there will be pitfalls on your way to realizing your potential, but that's what challenge is all about, okay? That's what challenge is all about. We all have to take on challenges. And yes, you will face competition, but you have to rise to the occasion. And I just want to say that we all believe in you. And your success starts right here. Again, you have potential for greatness, each and every one of you. And then the last thing I'll say, just a short quote from Nelson Mandela. May your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears.